June 14, 1985. A South San Francisco lumber yard. The afternoon sun cuts across the parking lot of South City Lumber on South Spruce Avenue. The asphalt holds the heat of the day, shimmering near the loading docks where stacks of 2x4s and plywood sheets sit under tarps. A clerk has just spotted a man walking out with a bench vise tucked under his arm. $75, not paid for. The clerk yells. A bearded man in his late 30s drops the vise, sprints toward a brown Honda Prelude idling at the curb, and slams the passenger door behind him. The car peels away, tires chirping against the warm pavement, leaving the vise on its side near the curb, like dropped luggage. The clerk grabs a pen. He writes down the license plate. He calls 911. Within 4 minutes, a South San Francisco police cruiser pulls the Honda over on a side street less than half a mile from the lumberyard. The driver is calm, bearded, bespectacled. A registered driver named Leonard Lake. He has both hands on the steering wheel when the officer approaches. He does not look surprised. He does not look frightened. He looks like a man pulled over for a broken taillight. Officer Daniel Wright walks up to the window and asks for identification. Lake hands over a driver's license with the name Robin Stapley. The photograph does not match the man's face. The officer feels the small click in the back of his skull that every patrolman knows. Something is wrong. He asks Lake to step out of the vehicle.
What investigators wouldn't fully understand until later that night, and what would unravel over the next 13 years across 3 court systems in 2 countries, is that the $75 shoplifting call had just cracked open the largest serial crime investigation in California history. This is the case of the Calaveras Bunker, a cabin in the woods, a wife who was also an accomplice, a cyanide pill swallowed in an interrogation room, a former Marine who fled north to Canada, 25 names that may never be fully accounted for, 2 tons of evidence, a trial that would last over a year and cost the state of California $20 million, the longest, most expensive criminal proceeding in the state's history. And it all started because a man stole a vise. Step back. South San Francisco, bordered by the bay and the airport, just south of the city proper. A working-class town of warehouses and chain-link fences, small machine shops and family restaurants tucked between auto body businesses. The hills behind the town carry the famous white-lettered sign, South San Francisco, the industrial city, a slogan dating back to 1923. June of 1985 is hot. The Cold War is winding down. Ronald Reagan is in his 2nd term. The Bay Area is still riding the early swell of Silicon Valley money. The radio stations are playing Tears for Fears and Phil Collins. Mortgage rates are starting to come down. Children are out of school for the summer.
None of that has anything to do with what is sitting in the trunk of a brown Honda Prelude on South Spruce Avenue. Officer Daniel Wright runs the license plate. The car is registered to Lonnie Bond of Humboldt County. Lonnie Bond is not behind the wheel. The driver is using the name Robin Stapley. The other man, the bearded one who tried to walk off with the vise, has already vanished. He slipped out of the passenger side during the stop and walked away. Small, Asian, in his early 20s, dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. Officer Wright doesn't know his name. He doesn't know any of it yet. He notes the absence in his pad and turns his attention back to the driver, because right now the driver is what he has. What he does know is that the man in front of him is sweating. Lake is in his late 30s, soft-spoken with the slightly worn look of a man who has spent too much time outdoors. His hands are steady, but his shirt is damp at the collar. He answers questions slowly, as if choosing each word from a small pile. He says he's from a place called Wilseyville in the Calaveras Mountains, about 3 hours east. He says the other man is just an acquaintance, a friend of a friend. He doesn't know his name either. Officer Wright doesn't believe him. The Honda is searched. In the trunk, officers find a .22 caliber Ruger handgun fitted with a silencer. Possession of a silencer is a federal offense.
There is a duffel bag containing a driver's license for a man named Robin Scott Stapley. There is a wallet with credit cards in the name of Paul Cosner. There is no Paul Cosner with Leonard Lake. There is no Robin Stapley. There is only Leonard Lake, sweating in earnest now, watching his trunk being inventoried by men in uniform. Lake is arrested, transported to South San Francisco Police Department headquarters and placed in an interrogation room. It is 4:30 in the afternoon. The detective assigned to him is Tom Eisenman. He is in his 40s, a career investigator with thinning hair and the kind of patient demeanor that comes from years of watching suspects either talk themselves into a corner or sit silent until the room does the work. He sits down across from Lake with a yellow legal pad. He asks for the suspect's real name. Lake gives a different alias. Eisenman asks for permission to fingerprint him. Lake nods. The fingerprints go into the system. The system is slow in 1985. It will take hours. Eisenman leaves the room to get coffee. There is a machine at the end of the hallway, a battered thing that produces something thin and bitter, and he fills a paper cup almost out of habit. When he steps back into the hallway, Lake asks the officer guarding the door for a glass of water and a pencil to write with. The officer, a young man named Smith, slides a paper cup of water across the table. Lake reaches into the collar of his shirt. He removes something small.
The movement is so casual that Officer Smith, watching from the doorway, will later say he thought Lake was adjusting his shirt. He drops it into his mouth. He raises the cup of water and drinks. Within seconds, his head jerks, his arms stiffen. He topples sideways out of the chair, his shoulders striking the linoleum with a flat, heavy sound. Officer Smith yells for help. Detective Eisenman sprints back into the room, coffee sloshing onto his hand and onto the floor. Lake is foaming at the mouth, his pupils are dilated, and his skin is going gray. Eisenman drops to his knees beside him, shouting for medical assistance, trying to clear the suspect's airway. The yellow legal pad sits on the table where he left it, untouched, with the single word he had written at the top, name. Paramedics arrive within minutes. Lake is rushed to Kaiser Hospital in South San Francisco. He is placed on life support. He will never wake up. 4 days later, on July 6, 1985, he is declared dead. The autopsy finds potassium cyanide. He had 2 capsules sewn into the lapel of his shirt. He swallowed one. The second was still there, undisturbed, when the medical examiner opened the shirt on the table. He had been prepared for some unknown period of time to die rather than be questioned. The question forming in Detective Eisenman's mind, the one that will drive the next 4 months of investigation, is what a man could be hiding that would make him eat poison before he even gave his name. The Honda Prelude is impounded. Investigators run the registration again. The car belongs to a missing person named Paul Cosner, a San Francisco car salesman who vanished in November 1984 after telling his girlfriend he was driving the Honda out to meet a strange buyer for a private sale. He had told her the buyer seemed off, but that the money was good. He had told her he would be back by dinner. Cosner never came back. His family had filed a missing person report. The case had gone cold. The Honda was on the wanted list. Officer Wright did not know that when he made the stop, but now Detective Eisenman does. Lake also had documents tied to another missing man, Robin Stapley, a San Diego 26-year-old who had founded a local chapter of the Guardian Angels. Stapley vanished in April 1985, about 2 months before the lumberyard stop. His pickup truck had been found wrecked near a town called Wilseyville in Calaveras County. Wilseyville, the name Lake had given, the mountain place. Detective Eisenman picks up the phone and calls the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office. The FBI is now involved. The case is no longer a shoplift. It is a missing persons file with at least 2 open names. By the morning of June 5, Special Agent Tom Ayu of the FBI San Francisco Field Office is on the line with Calaveras County Sheriff Claude Ballard. They are coordinating a search of any property tied to the name Leonard Lake.
There is a tone in those early phone calls, captured in the surviving FBI memos, of men who know they are looking at something with a long tail. 2 missing persons, a silencer, a cyanide capsule. The arithmetic does not add up to 1 or 2 crimes. It adds up to something larger. Lake's California driver's license, the real one, lists a post office box. His vehicle registrations and utility connections eventually point investigators to a remote 2.5-acre property on Blue Mountain Road in Wilseyville, a small ranch-style cabin set back in the Sierra foothills, surrounded by pines, with a long gravel driveway and no close neighbors. The nearest is over a quarter-mile away. The property sits on a slight rise, with a view down toward a dry creek bed and up toward the dense forest of the upper foothills. It is registered through Lake's common law wife, a woman named Claralyn Balaz. Cricket, she goes by. She is a teacher's aide at a local elementary school. The neighbors describe her, when asked, as polite, quiet, pleasant enough. On June 8, 1985, a search warrant is executed. Sheriff Ballard, his deputies, Special Agent Ayu, and a forensics team approach the cabin. The front door is unlocked.
Inside, it looks ordinary. Brown carpet, wood paneling, a wood stove with a small stack of split logs beside it, Cricket Balaz's clothes hanging in the closet, a neatly made bed.
A few books on the shelf, including a paperback copy of John Fowles's The Collector, with the spine cracked, opened many times. The kitchen is clean, dishes washed and put away, a coffee pot on the counter, a calendar on the wall with a few dates circled but no notes beside them. The deputies move through the rooms slowly, methodically, photographing each space before disturbing it. It is the outbuilding that stops them. About 30 feet from the back of the cabin, set into a small slope, there is a structure. From outside, it looks like a storage shed. Cinder block walls, painted a pale color, a heavy wooden door with a padlock already cut by deputies. The deputies expect tools, maybe a workbench, maybe a stash of survivalist supplies, since Lake's writings will turn out to be full of those themes. What they find when they crack the door open is a single bare bulb, a low ceiling, and a narrow corridor leading to a second reinforced door. Behind that door is a tiny inner chamber, bare walls, a single ring bolted into the floor, a two-way mirror facing a second chamber that is even smaller, a bed, restraints. The air inside carries a smell that several deputies will later describe, but never on the record. Special Agent Ayu has seen a great deal in his career. He stops at the threshold. He turns to one of the deputies and says, very quietly, that they are going to need more people. The search goes on for weeks.
It becomes one of the largest physical evidence operations in California law enforcement history. Cadaver dogs are brought in from 3 different counties. Investigators sift soil, they dig trenches, they use ground-penetrating sonar across the entire 2.5-acre lot. They find a buried 55-gallon drum. They find charred fragments of human bone in a burn pit behind the bunker. They find more bone, scattered in shallow trenches, mixed with concrete and lime. By the time the dig is finished, investigators have recovered roughly 45 pounds of charred human remains and over 2 tons of evidentiary material. Photographs, identification cards, wedding rings, driver's licenses, belonging to people no one had reported missing yet. A child's small jacket, a woman's purse, with a checkbook inside. The most recent entry dated months earlier. Personal letters, addressed to people who would be sought, in some cases, for years afterward. And then they find the videotapes. In a hidden compartment beneath the cabin floor, wrapped in plastic, are 21 VHS cassettes, labeled in Lake's handwriting with abbreviations and dates. The first investigator to view them is Sheriff Ballard. He sits down in front of a borrowed television in the cabin's main room, threads a cassette into a player, and presses play. He watches less than 2 minutes of the first tape. He stops the recorder. He walks outside.
He stands in the gravel driveway for a long time, his hands braced against the hood of his cruiser, looking out at the pines. One of his deputies will say later that he had never seen the sheriff look the way he looked that afternoon. The tapes are bagged and sent to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit at Quantico. What's most surprising about this case isn't the bunker or even the tapes, it's the paperwork. Inside the cabin, investigators find a handwritten journal. 2 journals, in fact. Lake had kept them as if they were the diary of a project. The first entry dates back to 1983. The handwriting is small, slanted, precise. Lake had named the operation. He called it Operation Miranda. Operation Miranda. Named for a character in a John Fowles novel, The Collector, published in 1963, about a man who kidnaps a young woman and locks her in a basement. Lake had borrowed the plot of a piece of fiction and tried to build it for himself. The journals are dense, detailed, almost bureaucratic. Lake describes himself as a man preparing for the collapse of civilization. He writes about nuclear war. He writes about creating a self-sufficient compound in the mountains. He has lists of supplies, estimates of caloric needs, calculations of how long stored food will last for 2 adults at various levels of physical exertion. And inside that compound, he writes, he intends to keep women, to serve him. He uses the word inventory. He also writes about a partner.
A man he refers to repeatedly by a single initial, C. C had a name, Charles Chitat Eng, born in Hong Kong on December 24, 1960. The son of a wealthy Hong Kong businessman, raised in privilege but reportedly troubled from childhood. He came to the United States as a teenager, attended a private boarding school in Yorkshire, England, before being expelled for theft. He had a string of small criminal incidents in his late teens. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1979 under a false identity, was caught stealing military weapons from the armory at the Marine Corps Air Station in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, and was court-martialed in 1981. He served 3 years in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. After his release in 1984, he linked up with Leonard Lake. Lake had also been a Marine, also dishonorably discharged, though Lake's discharge had been for psychiatric reasons rather than criminal ones. They had met through a survivalist publication called Survive magazine. They had corresponded for months before meeting in person. They had recognized something in each other on the page. Eng was 24 years old in June 1985. About 5'6", slender, with dark hair and a soft, almost boyish face. He had trained extensively in martial arts. The Lumbernard clerk's description matched him exactly. He was the man who had dropped the vice and walked away. By the time investigators realize who he is, he has a 4-day head start.
The manhunt for Charles Ng officially begins on June 8, 1985, the same day the bunker is opened. Within hours of being identified, his face is sent out across every law enforcement channel in California. By June 11th, his photograph is at every border crossing on the West Coast. By June 13th, he is on the FBI's most wanted list. There is a federal warrant. There are state warrants. There are warrants in 4 counties. Local newspapers in the Bay Area run his face on the front page. The story is picked up nationally. None of it matters. Charles Ng has not been in California for 48 hours. He had fled almost the moment Lake was arrested. From South San Francisco, he drove a stolen vehicle to San Francisco International Airport, dumped it in long-term parking, and boarded a flight. He paid cash. He used a false name. He flew north. By the morning of June 6th, 2 days before investigators even know who he is already in Chicago. From Chicago, he took a bus. He moved carefully, paying cash, avoiding identification checks where he could. By June 8th, the day Sheriff Ballard's team opens the bunker door, Ng has crossed the border into Canada. The trail goes cold for almost exactly 4 weeks. During those 4 weeks, the investigation back in California is gathering speed in the opposite direction. The cabin is being processed inch by inch.
Family members of missing people from around the Bay Area are being contacted and asked to come to a county office in San Andreas to look at photographs and personal effects. Some of those meetings are recorded in the case file in small, devastating notes. A mother identifying her daughter's earring. A father recognizing the strap of a watch he had given his son for graduation. A young woman, the girlfriend of Paul Cosner, sitting at a wooden table in front of a row of evidence bags, picking out a set of keys and starting to cry before the deputies had even confirmed what she was looking at. The cabin is producing a steady stream of these moments. The investigators, meanwhile, do not know if Ng is in California, in Mexico, in another country entirely, or sitting in a motel 2 miles from the cabin, watching the news on a small black and white television. July 6, 1985, Calgary, Alberta. The Hudson's Bay Company department store on 8th Avenue Southwest. It is a Saturday. The store is busy, full of weekend shoppers moving slowly between the racks. A man in his mid-20s, slim, Asian, walks through the housewares department carrying a small bag of stolen items. A loss prevention officer named Sean Doyle has been watching him on the closed-circuit cameras. Doyle, a former military man himself, has noticed the way the suspect moves, the way he keeps his back to the corners of the store, the way he angles his body when he reaches for an item. It looks rehearsed.
Doyle catches up to the man near the rear exit. He puts a hand on the man's arm. He says the words, "store security." The man reacts. He drops the bag. He pulls a small handgun, a .22 caliber pistol, from his waistband. He fires once. The bullet grazes Doyle's hand. The 2 men struggle. Doyle, who is bigger, slams the suspect to the ground. A nearby shopper, a man who had been looking at kitchenware not 10 feet away, helps pin the suspect's legs. Calgary police arrive within 90 seconds. They take the suspect to the Calgary City Jail and book him under the name he gives them, Mike Kimoto. Mike Kimoto's fingerprints are taken. They are sent to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police database. The next morning, July 7, 1985, an RCMP technician matches them to the FBI bulletin that has been pinned to her board for 3 weeks. The match is positive. Mike Kimoto is Charles Chitat Ng. Calgary calls San Francisco. San Francisco calls Sacramento. Sacramento calls Washington. By that afternoon, the United States Department of Justice has filed a formal extradition request with the government of Canada. That request will not be granted for 6 years. This is where the case enters its second life, the legal one, the slow one, the bureaucratic one, the one that turns Charles Ng into a name that lawyers and judges and politicians on both sides of the border will argue about for over a decade. The reason is straightforward. In California, the charges Ng faces carry a possible death sentence.
Canada had abolished capital punishment in 1976. Under Canadian law and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian government cannot extradite an individual to a country where they will face execution, unless the receiving country provides assurances that the death penalty will not be sought. California refuses to provide that assurance. The Attorney General of California, John Van de Kamp, refuses on principle. His successor refuses. The District Attorney of Calaveras County, where the bunker stands, refuses. The California prosecutor's position is that the scale of the charges, 11 counts of capital murder, makes any assurance against the death penalty politically and morally impossible to grant. The Canadian position is that its constitutional protections do not bend based on the gravity of the underlying offense. The deadlock holds for years. In the meantime, Ng sits in a Canadian prison. He is convicted in 1985 of the attempted shooting in the Hudson's Bay store and sentenced to 4.5 years. He serves that sentence at Edmonton Institution, a maximum security federal prison in Alberta. While he serves, the legal battle grinds on above his head. The case goes to the Canadian Federal Court. It goes to the Court of Appeal. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Civil liberties organizations file briefs. Editorial pages in both countries run dueling columns.
The Canadian Department of Justice receives, by one accounting, over 15,000 letters from the public about the case during the late 1980s, the majority urging extradition. On September 26, 1991, the Supreme Court rules. In a 6-1 decision, the justices find that Canada can extradite Ng to face the death penalty in California. The ruling, written by Justice Gerard Laforest, holds that under the circumstances of this case, given the scale of the charges, extradition without assurance is constitutional. It is one of the most heavily debated decisions in modern Canadian legal history. It will be partially overturned by a different case 10 years later. But for Charles Ng, in 1991, it ends the road. He is loaded onto an FBI jet at Edmonton International Airport on the morning of September 26, 1991. By that evening, he is in a holding cell in Calaveras County, California. The cell is in a small county facility a short drive from the property on Blue Mountain Road where the bunker once stood. He has been a fugitive, in custody but uncharged in California, for 6 years and 3 months. The investigators who built the case while he was gone had not been idle. While Ng sat in Edmonton, the FBI and the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office had assembled what would become the most physically dense criminal case file in California history. I spent hours going through the evidence summaries that survived from that era, and one detail kept nagging me.
The investigators had not been looking for 1 or 2 victims. They had been working from a list, Lake's own list. Inside the cabin, alongside the journals, investigators had found a typed inventory of names, 25 names. Some were people who had been reported missing, some were not. Some were people whose only connection to Lake had been a single conversation months earlier about buying a piece of furniture or selling a used car. The list read, in places, like a Rolodex from which entries had been quietly removed. By 1988, working with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and with forensic anthropologists at the University of California, Berkeley, investigators had matched physical remains and personal effects to 11 specific individuals, 11 names. Some of these people had vanished without anyone noticing. 2 were children. The total number of victims is officially 11. Lake's own writings and the contents of his lists suggest the real number is higher, possibly as high as 25. 12 names from the list were never resolved. The confirmed victims include Paul Cosner, the San Francisco car salesman, Robin Stapley of San Diego, a young Bay Area couple, Lonnie Bond and Brenda O'Connor, along with their infant son, Lonnie Bond Jr. The Bond-O'Connor family had been Lake's neighbors in Humboldt County before Lake encouraged them to move closer to him in the Sierra foothills. They had trusted him. That trust cost them their lives.
The confirmed victims also include Clifford Parenteau, a co-worker of Ing's at a Bay Area moving company called Dennis Moving, and another co-worker named Jeffrey Asker. There was Donald Lake, Leonard Lake's own younger brother, who had come to visit the cabin in 1983 and never left, and two women, Kathleen Allen and Mike Carroll, whose connection to the cabin came through Carroll's long-standing friendship with Leonard Lake. The youngest confirmed victim was an infant. The bodies, where they could be assembled at all, were assembled from fragments: charred bone, teeth, wedding rings melted into the burn pit. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Roger Heglar of San Francisco State University led the identification work. He worked on it for years. He told reporters in 1986 that he had never, in 20 years of forensic work, seen anything like the Calaveras site. He said it as a flat statement, not as commentary. That detail stuck with me. He had seen everything, and he said he had not seen this. The identification work carried its own quiet weight on the team that performed it. Dr. Heglar and his graduate students worked out of a laboratory at San Francisco State, sorting fragments by size, by burn pattern, by dental morphology. Each fragment was photographed, measured, and entered into a logbook that eventually filled multiple binders. The process was slow because it had to be slow. A single misattribution could collapse a charge in court.
The team developed a protocol in which no fragment could be assigned to a specific victim until at least two independent methods of identification supported the assignment. In some cases, that meant matching dental records to a fragment of jawbone. In some cases, it meant matching a personal item, such as a piece of jewelry, to a victim known to have worn it. The work took years, and in some cases produced no answer at all. Heglar, in a memo from 1987 that later became part of the case file, noted that he believed some of the remains of the site would never be identified because the burning had been thorough enough that no usable material remained. The investigation should have ended there. The evidence was in. The journals were transcribed. The tapes were cataloged. The remains were identified. 11 victims confirmed. Charles Ng in custody. Except the slowest part of the case, the trial itself, was still 6 years away from even beginning. Two forces drove that delay. The first was Charles Ng himself. Once he arrived in California, Ng filed motion after motion. He requested a change of venue. He went through 14 defense attorneys over the course of 6 years. He fired some resigned. One had a heart attack. Ng demanded the right to act as his own attorney. He was granted that right. He then changed his mind and demanded counsel again. He demanded transcripts in different formats. He demanded translators, despite being fluent in English.
He filed appeals on procedural grounds before any trial had begun. The pretrial docket for the Ng case eventually grew to over 3,000 entries. The second force was the sheer weight of the evidence. The prosecution had 2 tons of physical material. They had thousands of pages of Lake's journals to authenticate. They had the videotapes, which under California rules of evidence had to be screened, redacted, cataloged, and prepared for jury viewing under a process that took the district attorney's office over a year. They had remains that had to be matched, item by item, to specific charges. Every piece of evidence had to be photographed, logged, and prepared for chain of custody challenges. A single missing form could collapse a count. The prosecution team, led by Deputy District Attorney Charlene Hanaka and Prosecutor Peter Smith, worked nights and weekends for years. The District Attorney's office in Calaveras County, a small rural office unaccustomed to a case of this size, had to hire outside support staff just to keep up with the document management. There is a moment in 1994, recorded in a court filing, where the lead prosecutor explained to the judge that the office had begun running out of physical storage space for the case files. They had filled an entire wing of the county courthouse basement with banker's boxes. They had begun storing additional materials in a leased commercial warehouse in Stockton.
The judge granted a continuance to allow the office to reorganize. It was one of many. By 1998, more than 13 years after the bunker had been opened, jury selection finally began. The trial had been moved out of Calaveras County, all the way to Santa Ana in Orange County, 6 hours south. No jury in Calaveras County, where the crimes had occurred, could be impartial. The judge assigned to the trial was John J. Ryan, a veteran of complex criminal cases who was known for running a strict, methodical courtroom. He would need every bit of that discipline. The pool of potential jurors was screened through a written questionnaire that ran to over 40 pages. Voir dire took weeks. The selected jurors and alternates were given a level of confidentiality unusual even for capital cases. The people of the state of California versus Charles Chitot Ng began on October 26, 1998. It would run for 14 months. Pause for a moment on what this trial actually meant. 3 different court systems had been involved already: the Canadian provincial courts, the Canadian federal courts, and now the California state courts. The case had cost the Canadian government an estimated $7 million in legal proceedings alone before Ng was even extradited. The California trial would cost $20 million by the time it concluded. The transcripts run to over 20,000 pages. The witness list ran to over 200 names.
The prosecution would call FBI agents, sheriff's deputies, forensic anthropologists, fingerprint experts, family members of victims, former co-workers, former neighbors, and, in one of the most contested decisions of the trial, the wife of Leonard Lake. Cricket Balazs had been granted full immunity in 1985 in exchange for her cooperation. She had pleaded guilty to a single charge of accessory after the fact and served less than a year. Her testimony was central to the prosecution. She had been at the cabin. She had been present for parts of what happened there. She had, by her own admission, helped Lake dispose of evidence after his death by removing certain items from the cabin in the days before the police arrived. She took the stand in early 1999, more than 13 years after she had first walked out of a courthouse a free woman. She was almost unrecognizable. She had a new name, a new haircut, a new life in another state. She testified for several days. She was cross-examined aggressively by the defense. Through all of it, she answered in a small, controlled voice, looking mostly at her hands. Here's the take that will probably get us some pushback in the comments. The fact that Cricket Balazs walked out of this case with less than a year of jail time, a fresh identity, and a quiet life in another state is one of the hardest things about the Calaveras file to sit with. The prosecution needed her testimony. That part is true.
Without her, the case against Ng would have been thinner. But the deal she got was, by almost any measure, generous to the point of disturbing. That is a position. Reasonable people will disagree. It is part of what makes this case so difficult to put away cleanly. Put yourself in the shoes of one of the victim's family members in 1986, watching Cricket Balazs walk out of a courthouse with a plea deal. Imagine the trial then receding off into Canada for 6 years. Imagine then waiting another 7 years for the California trial to even start. By the time the verdict came down, some of the victims' parents had already died. Lonnie Bond's mother, who had followed the case for over a decade, lived to see the verdict by a matter of months. She had attended every available pre-trial hearing she could get to. She had kept a notebook of the proceedings. The notebook, after her death, went to her surviving family, who later donated it to a local historical archive in Humboldt County. It contains, in her handwriting, a single annotated entry next to the date of Ng's arraignment, 13 years. The defense's central argument was simple. Charles Ng said he had not been the principal actor. He said Leonard Lake had been the planner, the controller, the one who drove everything. Ng said he had been present, sometimes, but not the man behind the decisions. He pointed to Lake's journals. The journals named Ng. They discussed his role.
But the defense argued that they had been written by Lake. They were a dead man's account. The defense built much of its case around the idea that Ng had been a follower, a subordinate, a man drawn into another man's violence. Defense attorneys pointed to Ng's history of military offenses, his troubled adolescence, his prison record, and presented him as someone who had drifted, dangerously, into the orbit of a more organized criminal mind. The prosecution's response came through the tapes. On the videotapes, Charles Ng was clearly visible. He was identifiable. He spoke. He gave directions. He was not merely present. The tapes were the single most damaging piece of evidence in the prosecution's case. Jurors were shown selected, redacted portions of them across multiple days. The court recorded that several jurors became visibly distressed. One had to be excused for a day to recover. Judge Ryan called a recess after one particular screening and did not resume proceedings until the following morning. The court reporter's notes from that afternoon are unusually sparse, marked only with the procedural notation that the court was in recess for the day. The trial moved forward in chunks. There was a 6-week pause in 1999 when one of Ng's court-appointed defense attorneys, William Kelly, requested a delay due to medical concerns.
There was a separate 3-week pause due to a procedural error in the chain of custody on a single piece of evidence, a chain that had to be reconstructed from records going back to 1985. There was a moment in mid-1999 when investigators briefly believed a key witness, a former neighbor of Lake's from the Calaveras area, was about to recant under stress. He did not.
He testified. His testimony about a conversation he had with Lake about purchasing land adjacent to the property helped establish the timeline of when Lake had begun preparing the bunker. The courtroom itself, during those 14 months, became a strange kind of community. The same reporters showed up every day, the same family members when they could be there, the same court officers, the same bailiffs, the same handful of regular spectators. People got to know each other. People shared coffee in the hallway. The journalists assigned to cover the trial developed an informal note-sharing system for the long sessions in which little of immediate news value happened, but the cumulative weight of testimony continued to build. One reporter, writing later for a Bay Area weekly, described the trial as the longest funeral she had ever attended. What strikes us about this case, looking back, is what it reveals about how the American justice system handles complexity. The crimes were committed across a few years in the early 1980s. The investigation was finished in any meaningful technical sense by 1988.
And yet the trial did not conclude until February of 1999. The state spent 14 years from arrest to verdict on a case where the perpetrator had already been identified, the evidence had already been secured, and the suspect had already been confirmed in custody. The system did not fail in the sense of letting him go. It groaned. It moved. It moved slowly. It is a strange thing to watch and to know was, at the same time, the system working exactly as it was designed. There is a question we want to put directly to you. Was the 13-year delay in Charles Ng's extradition the price of doing things correctly, or was it an institutional failure that let a case rot? It is an honest question. We don't think there's a clean answer. Tell us what you think. The verdict in The People of the State of California versus Charles Chutat Ng was delivered on February 24, 1999. The jury had deliberated for less than 10 days. Charles Ng was found guilty of 11 counts of murder in the first degree. He was found guilty of all special circumstances making him eligible for the death penalty under California law, including multiple murders, lying in wait, and murder during the commission of other felonies. The conviction was not contested on the principal facts. The defense, in its closing arguments, had asked the jury to spare Ng's life. The jury did not. On June 30, 1999, Charles Chutat Ng was formally sentenced to death by Judge John J. Ryan.
He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison and placed on California's death row. He has remained there continuously since 1999. He is, as of this recording, still alive, still on death row, still litigating his case. California's death penalty has been on a de facto moratorium since 2019. No executions have been carried out in the state since 2006. Charles Ng is now in his mid-60s. The cabin in Wilseyville was burned to the ground by the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office in 1987, 2 years after the investigation began. The bunker had already been documented down to the smallest detail, photographed, measured, filmed. There was nothing left for it to give. Sheriff Ballard, when asked years later why the structure was destroyed, said only that nothing good was ever going to grow on that ground while it was still there. The land was sold to a private party. The new owner cleared the lot. The pines that had once shaded the back of the property were left standing, but the structures, all of them, came down. No permanent structure has been built on the property since, as far as anyone knows. Hikers and curiosity seekers occasionally come up the road looking for the place, and the county sheriff's office has, over the years, had to remind the public that the property is private and that trespassing is not tolerated. Cricket Balaz, who had been granted immunity, divorced Leonard Lake post-mortem. She remarried. She changed her name. She moved out of California. She gave one extensive interview to a Bay Area reporter in the mid-1990s and has been silent in the press since. She is believed to still be alive. Attempts by journalists in the years since have not produced a current contact for her. Her family members have declined to comment. Detective Tom Eisenman, the man who had walked out of the interrogation room for a cup of coffee and walked back in to find Leonard Lake dying on the floor, retired from the South San Francisco Police Department in the late 1990s. He spoke publicly about the case only a handful of times. He told a reporter in 1998, the year the trial finally began, that he had thought about the case every day for 13 years, and that he expected to think about it every day for the rest of his life. He kept in his home office a single sheet of paper
on which he had written in 1985 the word he had managed to put on the yellow legal pad before leaving the interrogation room. Name. That was all. He kept it framed. He told his daughter, late in his life, that it was a reminder that the most important questions are usually the simplest, and that sometimes you do not get to ask them. He died in 2017. Special Agent Tom Ayu of the FBI San Francisco Field Office, the lead federal coordinator on the search at Wilseyville, retired in 1991. He helped develop training material for the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit on serial offender pair dynamics, drawing in part on the Lake N case.
That material became part of the unit's standard curriculum at Quantico. Agents trained in the late 1990s and early 2000s learned from the Calaveras case the importance of recognizing the structure of certain offender partnerships, the role of dominant and compliant participants, and the way a planner and an executor can produce more harm together than either would have produced alone. Sheriff Claude Ballard of Calaveras County, the man who had opened the door of the bunker on June 8, 1985, retired from law enforcement in 1991. He stayed in Calaveras County. He kept to himself. He fished, he gardened, he spent time with his grandchildren. He did not give interviews. He died in 2012. According to his obituary, the family asked that no one mention the case at his funeral. The request was honored. The total number of victims has never been resolved. The official count, the one that appeared on the indictment and led to Ng's conviction, is 11. Lake's journals and his own internal records suggest the real number is somewhere between 16 and 25. Some of the names on the list were checked against missing persons databases and found to correspond to no one. Some corresponded to people who turned up alive years later. Some have never been matched at all. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit maintains the case file as open with respect to the unresolved names. It is, technically, still an active investigation. 12 names from the list have never been resolved.
12 people, possibly, who appear in the journal of a dead man, and whose families may not even know to be looking. That is one of the strangest aspects of the Calaveras file. We could not, in our research, find a publicly available copy of the full, unredacted list of names. The FBI has never released it. The list exists. It is in the case file. It is presumably in the possession of investigators who have aged out, retired, and in some cases passed on, with the file still open. There is a line in one of the early case summaries that reads almost like fiction. Sheriff Ballard, in a memo dated June 12, 1985, wrote that the cabin and the bunker felt less like a crime scene than like a place where a man had been preparing for something. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The videotapes are still in FBI custody. They have never been publicly screened in their entirety. The redacted portions used at trial were viewed by the jury and then sealed back into the case file. The remaining content has never been released. There are ongoing legal arguments about what should be done with the tapes long-term. Some advocates argue for their destruction on the grounds that the material itself is harmful and that the victims and their families have a right to have the recordings destroyed.
Others argue for their preservation as historical record, on the grounds that destroying evidence in an officially open case is improper, and that future identifications of additional victims may someday depend on the contents. As of this recording, they remain in storage at an FBI evidence facility. The debate, slow and quiet, continues. Operation Miranda, the name Leonard Lake gave to his project, was a reference to a novel about a man who collected. The FBI's behavioral profile, completed in 1988 by a team led by Special Agent Roy Hazelwood, classified Lake as the dominant partner in the offender dyad. N was the compliant participant. That distinction would matter at trial. It would not save Charles N from a death sentence. The Behavioral Analysis Unit's report on the Lake N case became one of the foundational documents in the FBI's understanding of paired serial offenders. It is taught at Quantico to this day. Here's the part that doesn't sit quite right, even now. The case was cracked because a clerk wrote down a license plate, not because of a tip, not because of years of police work, not because of a forensic breakthrough, because of a $75 vice and a clerk who happened to look up at the right moment.
Leonard Lake, who had built a bunker, who had kept a journal, who had a wife and a brother and a partner, who had planned for nuclear war and stockpiled food and weapons in the Sierra foothills, who had thought, evidently, of everything, was undone by the simplest possible thing. A man wanted a vice. The man took a vice. He didn't pay for the vice.
and the entire structure of his life collapsed inside of 4 hours. There is a way of looking at the Calaveras case where the lesson is about evil. There is another where the lesson is about the very ordinary mechanics of how serious crimes are actually solved in the United States. Most of the time, the breakthroughs are small: a license plate, a wrong name on a driver's license, a nervous suspect, a young officer with the discipline to ask one more question. The catch in this case was as small as catches get. The story that came out of it was the largest serial crime investigation in California history. We spent a lot of time on this script trying to figure out how to convey the scale of what was hidden in the Sierra foothills and how thin the thread was that pulled it into the open. The story doesn't have a neat ending. Charles Ng is still on death row in California, nearly 4 decades after his Calgary arrest. Cricket Balaz lives somewhere under another name. The cabin is gone. The bunker is gone. 12 names on a typed list, in a dead man's handwriting, remain unaccounted for.
Their families, if they exist, do not know. The FBI's file remains open. There is no closure here. There is only the work of having done as much as anyone could do. If you have a story like this from your area, a case in your part of the country that started with something small and unraveled into something far larger, we want to hear about it. We read every comment. Some of the cases we cover on this channel come directly from things you tell us. The Calaveras case started, in a way, with a phone call from a clerk to a dispatcher. The right people listening at the right moment matters. It mattered here. If you made it this far, thank you. This case took us a long time to put together, and we appreciate every viewer who stays with us through a story this dense. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet. The next case we have lined up involves a routine traffic stop on Interstate 70 in Kansas in 1996 that led to the takedown of one of the largest organized auto theft and counterfeit document rings ever prosecuted by the United States Department of Justice. It starts with a state trooper. It starts with a broken taillight. It ends with 72 federal indictments. We'll see you there.